it was amazing to me, just the assumptions that were made, absolutely blatant assumptions that everybody believed exactly the same thing. And there was no awareness whatsoever that there might be students there that think differently, that weren't having the same experience.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Gabrielle Turner. She's a licensed professional counselor and licensed marriage and family therapist. We had a conversation the other day. She was so gracious to welcome me into her home for a meal, and I got to meet her family. It was really wonderful. And our conversation felt like it could have gone on forever. We're just clicking on so many things, and I thought I need to record some of this. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, awesome. It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
So I want to start off by asking, what motivated you to become a therapist?
Okay, I gotta try to shorten this answer because people have asked me this before, and it's kind of a long story. But essentially, it took me a while to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. Tried a bunch of different things, but I had some key life experiences that kind of pointed me into this direction. As a young mother, I was diagnosed with MS and became disabled, and I use a wheelchair now. And that was a major kind of turning point in my life, sort of redefining who I was, understanding who I was as a human being, changing all of my life expectations. I really had to kind of rewrite the narrative of my life, how I thought it was going to go, and how expectations for my future. That was a difficult process. I was also dealing with changes in my family, the stresses in my family, a lot of stress that was experienced by my young children at the time that then ended up having kind of ripple effects into their future. And I found myself, when one of my boys was about 12 years old and he was having some difficulties, looking for a therapist for him, and realizing that there is a niche there for me, working with teenagers and with families. I knew I didn't have the proper skills to help my child at the time, and it's probably not, the role of parent and therapist is a different role. But I knew I wanted to go into the helping profession at some point. I was homeschooling my kids at the time, so I was very occupied, very busy. But when I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel of raising children, I knew that I wanted to do something that felt maybe, a fraction as meaningful as that, something that I could help people that were going through similar struggles as I had gone through, and everybody goes through struggles. And a lot of the things that I learned going through mine, I think are generalizable to people in general, like understanding how to, write a new narrative for your life. And anyway, those are some of the things that kind of led me into thinking that I wanted to pursue a career in the mental health and therapy in general field.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was actually homeschooled from kindergarten through ninth grade, and I know that was a big sacrifice that my mom made, and I'm really grateful for that type of education, which I think was so different from what I might have gotten like at a public school. I'm sure your kids are as well. So you had this experience, like you're obviously a very empathetic person. You want to help people. You obviously have that heart about you. And you had this idea, I'm going to become a therapist so that I can help people kind of in this specific way. How was it different to you in what you're expecting versus what you actually saw in graduate school?
Very different. It wasn't. Yeah. So I'd gone back to school. I had gone back to community college to take all of the psychology courses that they had, because my undergraduate degree was in biochemistry and I had no background in psychology at all, except for just my own reading that I'd done, which was significant. But so I'd become kind of aware of the political changes on campus just from that experience. And when I got to graduate school, it was that, but times maybe 10. It was a lot more. And yeah, it was surprising how much kind of political indoctrination there was. Not in every course, but certainly in a couple of courses, and it was a component of every course. So, I was thinking that I was going to go and like learn learn a bunch of counseling techniques, how to do therapy, a good background in development. There was some of this, of course. And all of that was there. I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. But it was laced with this kind of baseline of political indoctrination that I felt was so contrary to what I had expected, learning how to be a therapist to involve, where, you're kind of checking your assumptions at the door, and you want to, be there with full openness and curiosity with the person that you're in front of. You definitely don't want to be imposing your own political, feelings on a person that you're working with. I just felt like politics and therapy are like not even on the same dimension, and that was, I was taught repeatedly that is not the case in counseling.
That's so similar to what I've experienced in graduate school as well. And the way I describe it is it so often feels like you're trying to jam a square peg in a round hole, like just in ways that don't quite fit at all. You might be having this, this discussion in class, and I might think I have a really good answer. Okay, this is how you might treat this client. And then somebody says, well, what if it's a gay woman in the state of Texas, which is, we're a red state, so we're really evil. So you didn't think about that, did you? It's like, well, that didn't really seem like part of the case study to me. It's kind of this constant, even if it's not directly right in front of you, it's always hanging in the air, it felt like to me.
Yeah. And definitely in some classes more than others. And perhaps with some students, I don't know what, I think probably your experience was the same as mine, which is that a lot of this is coming from the students more than the professors. So a lot of the comments from students will have this kind of political edge. But I know exactly what you mean, where it feels like it feels like it's like this whole separate kind of category. If you're rather than a human problem, and like trying to join with somebody on a human to human level, if you're dealing with somebody who happens to look different from you, or have a different sexual orientation or something like that, then suddenly we're in a different category of helping, and you have to like plug in all of these like political identity issues and all of the rules that would normally apply with therapy, like helping people find their agency and helping people understand kind of their circle of control. Like all of that apparently doesn't apply in these other categories of people, and that it felt very artificial to me.
It almost feels like the opposite of what good therapy would be, because like you were saying, helping them find agency, autonomy, like empowering the client to take control of their own lives. And it's more like, no, there's these systems and structures out there that are disempowering you, and you really don't have any control over your life. You're kind of, almost trying to move the client away from that healing and empowering, in a sense, or at least certain clients. Like if it's a racial minority or like a gay or lesbian client, you're kind of disempowering them in that victim mindset. But if it's like a heterosexual white male like me, you're allowed to give the best possible therapy. That just seems weird to me.
100%, totally. Like those things that would, and like I know this from my own experience. So this isn't just like, this is from my own experience, that like when terrible things happen that are beyond your control, that you have no fault over yourself. Like this was my experience with disability. I didn't ask for this. It was nothing that I had done to deserve. It impacted my life in every way. Like this is the time when you have to lean into what you can actually control yourself. Like otherwise you're a complete victim of your own life. And like this is not the road to thriving. It just isn't. I knew this like deep down in my bones from my own personal experience, and then I'm being taught in these graduate courses from these textbooks that somehow if your challenge is a different type of challenge, then somehow all the rules that were so important in me getting my life back on track somehow don't apply. And it just felt really wrong. Like, why would you take away from a person the most important tools that they could possibly have in making their way through like the messiness and the difficulties of life? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about lived experience in our type of programs, and you have lived experience. You're a woman, you've had this disability, and you're in a wheelchair, and it seems like neither of those things are enough to overcome the fact that you're white, right? That seems like the sin that kind of rules all over all others.
Yeah, and somehow that means that like any of my insights don't apply, again, because I guess I'm a different category of person or something. I do feel like I will say I'm trying to remember if I did this really overtly, pulling out the disability card. I mean, I try to in my courses. I did try to push back, to offer a different perspective. I would try to ask questions that would lead people to maybe think of things in a slightly different way. And I felt like I had the advantage, certainly, of a disability that people couldn't really push back on me too much, because I had that I had that identity characteristic. It also felt at the same time really gross, because I don't actually think that I think that like these are human perspectives that anybody could come to, and they're valid for anybody regardless of what happened to them previously in their life.
Yeah. So there's one class for me, and I think you took the same one, and that was the Counseling the Culturally Diverse class.
Yeah.
That really pretty much all it was, there was really zero counseling or therapy focus. It was 100% political indoctrination. I'm wondering if you had the same experience, or what that class was like for you.
Yeah, totally the same. It was, yes, from the very beginning, from the first page of the textbook, I think, in the first lecture in the class, it was painful. That was such a painful class. I would have these arguments in my head constantly with the book, with the textbook, with the teacher, with the students, and it was very clear to me from the very beginning that these are perspectives that are not welcome. These are things that are not up for debate. This is your personal, opinions or experiences are invalid because you are white, and that was 100% clear from the very beginning. It was, infuriating.
Yeah, that's one of the most bizarre things about the new manifestation of social justice is it's kind of built into the ideology that there's no legitimate way to disagree, right? If you're white and you disagree, it's because you're trying to preserve your privilege and you just have a problem with minorities doing better. You're just kind of resentful for some reason. And if you are a racial minority, it's because you have internalized racism. And at one point in the Darrell Wing Sue book, it says, if you're a black person who does not believe you're oppressed, you're suffering from Uncle Tom syndrome. And it's like they've kind of covered all the exits to where there's no way out to legitimately disagree.
Right, and it tells you at the beginning. So the beginning of the book, I'm sure you remember, it's full of these vignettes that are just they're just terrible. But they're vignettes from white students, apparently, that Sue has had in previous courses, or emails he's gotten from students reading his book, that are. So what he does is he does this trick where he conflates these two things. He conflates the person's legitimate objections with the book, which I think there are many, many, many legitimate objections, and then he'll pair it with. And I personally don't believe that these vignettes are real. I think he's made them up. I don't believe that they're real, because I've never met a single human being in my entire life that says anything like the white therapists and the white students that he gives vignettes for in his book. But so then he'll pair the legitimate objections with some super gross racist thing, like, like, you people, or just like the worst kind of racist stuff that I've never said, I've never thought, and I literally have never met anybody who talks like that. But this is the trick. So if you have an objection, then you are just like those people in the vignette who are clearly racist. And you don't want to be racist, do you? Oh no. So you better not show an objection. And then he'll say, like, this is the work. If you're finding yourself, struggling with some feelings as you're reading this book, like, this is part of the work that you need to do. This is evidence of your internal racism. I mean, it's the same kind of garbage that's in Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility book. It's the same exact thing.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
And so there's no way, like, if you want to push back on this in class, then you're essentially just admitting to being a racist, and who wants to do that? So you just shut up and you accept it. That's the incentive that he's clearly trying to create.
Yeah, and kind of what bothered me a lot about my counseling the culturally diverse class is we never actually talked about counseling culturally diverse clients. So an example that I like to give is, there's this one, like you say, just like ridiculous bumbling white male therapist who's like the Three Stooges of therapists, basically, who's just kind of, completely destroying a session with a Latina woman with anxiety. And, I raised my hand. I said, okay, I recognize I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes. I might even do some of these things. I hope not. But, like, what would be the correct way to counsel this woman? And my professor said, we're not going to get into that today. Yeah, and it was like that with every example. There's never a time when they teach you, okay, this is how you would approach specifically this population with this issue. You never got into that. For me, it was all about, if you're white, you're probably doing it wrong, and therefore you need to have left-wing politics. I don't know how those two are connected, but that's the only message I got.
Totally. You're completely right about this. And, I mean, you can go through the whole textbook, and there's a bunch of, like, counterexamples, I guess, which I would never have done anyway, because, again, like, the examples that they provide are so gross. And, like, I'm a student. I've never been a therapist before, and I know I would never use these words. I would never have this kind of pompous attitude. But then, like, this is what's described as, like, the white way of being a therapist, and I'm just like, it's just not true. But then what do you do instead, right? Apparently you're supposed to go out and become an activist. That's the answer, right? It's like you're supposed to apparently help the person figure out all the ways in which they've been oppressed, and then you're supposed to go out and I guess go march around the Capitol building holding a sign. I don't actually know what that means. And what do you do instead? I mean, I was, I guess, interested to discover some helpful things, which is like, here are how different cultural, these are some of the different ways that different cultures might interpret eye contact, for example. Or here's the different ways that, people will use emotional expressiveness. I don't even know how helpful that was, because people vary, and like this was something that I tried to say multiple times. It was never, I don't think it was ever emphasized in the book at all, that there's more variation within racial categories and cultural categories than there are between groups, right? So there might be some average differences in, how freely emotionally expressive different racial groups might be, but within each racial group there's far more variation. And this is certainly my experience too. Like, there's plenty of shy white kids who don't feel comfortable making eye contact, but it doesn't mean that, it doesn't, anyway. And so I guess it was vaguely interesting to learn. I don't know that there was anything really that important about it, because this is just about being curious. So if there's someone that doesn't make eye contact with you, I'm not going to jump to the conclusions that, like, they're being evasive. I mean, these are the things that it would say in the book, that like as a white therapist, you're going to assume that the person is being evasive because they're not making eye contact. And I'm thinking, no, I wouldn't. Why would I do that? Like, I just wouldn't even do that naturally. But as a therapist, especially when you're trying to be curious about somebody and really get into their life, why would you make that assumption? I wouldn't. So, yeah, I just felt like the whole book was entirely useless. Like, you can have a page about, hey, be open and curious and don't make assumptions, and then just skip the rest of it.
Yeah, it's just really bizarre. On the kind of part about difference in emotional expressiveness by race, if you were to kind of rank it, African Americans would have the most emotional expressiveness, and then white people, and then Asian Americans at the bottom. And what I found interesting in the book is they would compare white and black and say, like, basically white people are too toned down, like not emotionally expressive enough. And then they would compare white people and Asian people and be like, white people are too emotionally expressive. Like, I don't know if you got that, but it seemed like the same kind of thing. But when you're like, either comparison you're making, the white people are wrong in the way they're doing it.
Yeah, right. And so it's like, if you wanted to take these things to their logical conclusions, that just you wouldn't do that. So it's like, don't think too hard about these things, basically, essentially. And it's if you're white, you're gonna be wrong. Just that's the case. But I don't know. There's plenty of pretty gross things in there too. Just like I don't know if you remember this part where it's talking about how Asian people think that black people are lazy and uneducated and have a poor work ethic, and I'm like, wow, that sounds like a generalization. I don't. Okay, why would you introduce any of this in a graduate course? This is where we're all trying to learn how to not make assumptions and generalizations. And they would bring examples from like the LA riots, like, you know, Korean store owners and their experience, that very specific experience from back in the early 1990s, and then generalize this as if this is how all Asians think about all blacks in 2020. It's ridiculous.
You know what I thought about that? There's the kind of Korean versus black in LA, and then there was like Hispanic versus black. There's these different kind of comparisons between different minority groups, and then it said, but all these are the fault of white supremacy. Do you remember that?
Yeah. This is internal. These are, yeah. It's like, this is, if they weren't embedded in a white supremacist culture, then apparently everybody would be living in happy harmony, because I don't know why they would think that, because there's never been a single example of that in all of human history. But
Yeah, it almost reminds me, if you've ever had a friend who's kind of a paranoid conspiracy theorist, and they think, you know, anything that happens, like, oh, you know, the government is watching us or something like that. It's like that, but with white supremacy. Like, anything that happens, the most, you know, mundane, innocuous thing, oh, that's white supremacy. They're just looking for it everywhere. And it's just kind of this unhinged paranoia.
well, but yeah, and it's not even hidden. I mean, they'll say that white supremacy is embedded in everything, and it's the water that you swim in. It's so embedded in everything that you can't even identify it. So yeah, it becomes this very almost mystical thing, completely non-falsifiable. And the easy, you know, boogeyman of any societal ill, you can just blame that on white supremacy. There's
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't see it, so you have to rely on us to tell you, and you have to believe it when we tell you.
Yeah, essentially that's it. And anything that people do that is not helpful for themselves, like, this is just a normal response to white supremacist culture. And I don't know if you remember, there's a whole a whole chapter was kind of revolving around this hypothetical little boy who was he had moved from LA to the horrible white supremacist, you know, hills of Santa Barbara, and he's in his school, and, you know, at this school he starts having a bunch of problems, and he's fighting kids and stuff like this, and like the whole chapter was about like how it would be inappropriate to work with this child on how, different ways that he might respond, but instead, like how all of his behaviors are a predictable and understandable and excusable reaction to white supremacy.
I remember that example specifically because there was a part in there where it said, assuming the therapist should have the goal of reducing his fighting would be a racist assumption.
Yes, right,
Like you
right.
don't want to stop the fighting.
No, because the fighting is, from this worldview, a rational response to the white supremacist culture that he was at. And like I remember just having so many internal arguments about this area. I mean, it's like, okay, if bullying was happening, which it was never even made clear in that vignette if that were actually true, if there was bullying and racial epithets being thrown, okay, that's something that you deal with. Like bullying is bad. Let's bring in the students that are involved in bullying, and let's maybe bring in the parents, and but still there's no situation where telling a kid that continuing to fight is the correct response. And anyway, this was not.
Yeah. And I remember one of the justifications for why it was a rational response, him fighting, was he had a Eurocentric curriculum. And it's like,
Right.
well, we studied George Washington today, so I had to hit a kid. Just like this makes sense in that, from that logic, from that worldview. Like it doesn't make sense in the rest of the world.
It doesn't make sense to the rest of the world. Yeah, and it's like teachers wish that their students were engaged enough in the curriculum that they could have some opinions about whether or not, like, black people are being properly represented in their American history textbook. Yeah, no, that's total fantasy, total fantasy.
Yeah, kind of coming back to something you're saying earlier, like a lot of this seems like a thinly veiled excuse to push politics. I know in my program there's a lot of stuff where you'll get extra credit if you go protest or do stuff, at the Capitol, advocacy or political activism. Recently in my program, they had to rescind an email and send a second one because the first email said, basically, this is what we want you to protest for at the Capitol, and the second email said, protest for what you believe in. But like what they want us to do, though. They have a very specific set of ideals and values, and this is what you're supposed to support, and these are the politics you're supposed to embrace, and this is who you're supposed to vote for. It's like, it's not like they're trying to hide it, really. And actually, I had a conversation with the director of my program, and one of the problems I said, I was like, this seems like kind of just, thinly veiled political indoctrination. And she said, well, the politics are a big part of our profession. Like, she wasn't trying to deny that. And I'm wondering what you see as like kind of the heavy-handed political push of this profession and kind of the grad program specifically.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. I mean, going back to the textbook, there's whole sections that are basically, essentially communist indoctrination, and they're saying the quiet part out loud. That these are the things that you have to believe and you have to fight for, and it's political, like they say that. So that's part of that textbook. My graduate school program, we did not have, like, thankfully this was not a part of it, in like for us in terms of getting extra credit for going out and protesting things. But yeah, I mean, it's clear that apparently, when I was surprised about this, I knew that, like, social workers, like, part of their job is to help people navigate sort of social institutions and things like that. I didn't know that that's what counseling was supposed to be, and it still isn't. Like, I literally don't know any counselors in my profession now that do any sort of advocacy in their actual practice. Like, that doesn't happen. Maybe if you're a school counselor or something, I don't know if it's different in school counseling. So we didn't have, like, we weren't given extra credit for going and protesting things. But I was in school I began in fall of 2019, so I was in school during the summer of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests and riots, during the very contested 2020 election, and it was amazing to me, just the assumptions that were made, absolutely blatant assumptions that everybody believed exactly the same thing. And there was no awareness whatsoever that there might be students there that think differently, that weren't having the same experience. And this is just an asymmetry that is everywhere in this profession. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at like the American Counseling Association, they have these like statements that are just overtly political, and apparently that's okay to do, and you're alienating 50% of the population from a political perspective, but, who cares? We're going to make our political points, and that's the only thing that's important.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost like they had social justice envy of the social workers. Like, there's some higher level of like morals that comes from political activism, and so there's kind of this like one-upmanship where we have to be more of a political activist so that we can be like the most moral discipline within the therapy professions or something like that.
Okay.
You said actual therapists don't do a lot of this. So you see a pretty big difference between how they present it in grad school and how actual therapists behave in the real world. Is that right?
So far, that's my experience for sure. I have a group. I work in a group practice, and I mean, you go to trainings and think this is part of what you have to do. So you're in regular contact with other therapists, and I don't know of anybody, like it still is not entirely clear to me, back to your point before, like what it is that you're actually supposed to be doing when you're supposed to be fighting against these, structures of white supremacy. Like, what does that actually mean? I don't really know, except for, putting a statement on your website, maybe, that you're anti-racist. Even, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, in my internship, I had, the internship where I was, it was a child advocacy group. So we're working mostly with kids. There's some teens, but it's mostly kids. And again, when was this? This was in fall of 21 and winter, spring of 22. So it's kind of right still in the Black Lives Matter protest era. And they had hired a diversity consultant, and they were paying her, I can't remember how much it was, but I looked it up, and they were paying her some ungodly amount to come and be a consultant to help root out the white supremacy and the racism that was inherent in this child guidance center where I was working. And first of all, there just wasn't any to begin with. There were just therapists working with children. There wasn't. And this was evidenced by like the suggestions that she made, which were cosmetic ones. It was like, well, you need to have more pictures of, children of color, I guess, on the walls. And you need to have like, you need to change the wording on your brochures. I mean, it was like this cosmetic, like nitpicky details, and they were paying her some like, I don't even remember. And this is a group that is, purely funded by philanthropy, right? Because these are kids that are coming in for free services, and we're paying this diversity consultant, and anyway, I'm like, okay, if that's what this means, if that's what fighting white supremacy is we're going to change some wording on some brochures, and we're going to hang up some different pictures in the hallways. This is bogus. Sorry, it's all a grift. It's a serious grift, and that's what I believe still to this day.
Oh, so much of this social justice stuff to me seems like very, very privileged people are jealous of kind of the gritty authenticity that you saw from, socialists or activists from a couple generations ago. And you think, well, maybe we can have our own form of kind of revolutionary politics without really giving up any of our privilege. So we'll pretend to be extremely radical, but we're really just kind of in the faculty lounge or, just chilling in our, drinking Starbucks or whatever. It seems like there's this big disconnect between the language and who these people actually are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, I feel like there's, what would be the right way of putting it? Like a civil rights envy or something, right? It's like they want to think of themselves as these like freedom fighters out there putting themselves on the front line, like marching in Selma and, being confronted with, police dogs and fire hoses. But first of all, like none of that is even happening now. And like, this was also just infuriating to me where they'd have, going back to the Geraldine Sue book, where, they give examples of racism and the citation would be from 1972. It's like, yeah, okay, fair. I'm sure that there were a lot of, not helpful things that were happening in 1972. It's 50 years later. Things are not the same now, but there's still this craving to be like the civil rights heroes, and we're looking for the civil rights movement of our time, and we're gonna stand up to the man, but without actually standing up to the man, because there's not really there. That was a particular time and place, and we're not there anymore. But yeah, if it actually got to the point where it was requiring anything besides standing with some signs in front of the Capitol building where you're not putting yourself at any risk whatsoever, they wouldn't be there for it.
Yeah. No revolution that might involve chipping a nail.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about kind of the race issue and the social justice movement and how that's affecting the, training therapists. I want to talk a little bit about gender ideology. I know I walked through a faculty wing of my university the other day, and every single professor's door, without exception, every single one had the new Progress Pride flag on it. It was almost like we have to pay fealty to the regime. It's like this is kind of our religion in a sense. It was kind of bizarre to me. Like you thought, if we're all social justice activists, far left wing, they still expect to see different types of things, like maybe a Ukraine flag over here or a Palestinian flag. Every single one was the Progress Pride flag, right? And it was like, okay, something's off here. I'm wondering what you see in terms of gender ideology and kind of how this mindset is taken over.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I think the Progress Pride flag is hilarious. Like, it's literally a wedge, right? It's the triangle. It's literally a wedge issue that's breaking apart the rainbow flag.
I never thought about that. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what it is. This was, I'm trying to remember when the Progress Pride flag became a thing. Was that a thing when I was in grad school? I can't remember if it was. But yeah, absolutely. There were rainbow flags for sure everywhere. And that's become the new religion. And it was something that was very disturbing to me, just because again, like, there is never any counter perspective offered at all. I had an experience in what the class, I think it was like special issues in, I can't even remember the class that it was, but it was a class presentation, and a lot of the really objectionable stuff in my graduate program was in these student presentations. It was less coming from the professors, and a lot of it coming from students. So there's a student presentation on gender affirming care for kids, and it was full of all of the predictable stuff, right? It had like they had like this, I'm trying to remember how they did it. but it, like, all of these words for like the stereotypical like feminine and masculine, and you're supposed to like circle the word, you know, if you're like going to be a therapist working with a child, for example, then they're supposed to like circle the words that they felt like, you know, applied to them, and then you can kind of see where you are on the spectrum from male to female, and it's like, oh look, okay, well yes, you were assigned male at birth, but look, you're actually, you know, 65% female, so I guess you're trans. It was just like, yeah. And then so this whole thing about gender affirming care and how important this is, and I'm just sitting there like, it was, you know, at the end of these student presentations, it was common to ask questions, and of course, like in this very female dominant, like really supportive, no one's actually going to ask any questions that push back. It's all going to be like very like, oh, well done, I really loved what you said about this, and, you know, tell me more about this. And I, in this presentation, I remember just thinking, I cannot sit by and just let some of these things go by unaddressed. I can't. It was eating me up inside. So I was thinking like, what's something that people in general would accept, right? There's so many internal contradictions in gender ideology. I mean, it's just chock full of logical contradictions. And so this is one of them. And I you know, said something like, it's interesting that a lot of the statistics are showing that kids that are same-sex attracted, otherwise gay or lesbian kids, they're overrepresented among this cohort of kids that are identifying as trans. And you know, I brought up, I'd heard a podcast from, now I can't even remember, a gay man who was very active in the original like protests for, you know, advocating for gay rights, like back in the Stonewall days, right? I had heard him talking about his distress that a lot of gay kids were now being shunted into transition, which is essentially true conversion therapy, like absolutely true conversion therapy. Anyway, so I brought up this concern that, you know, some people in the gay rights community are concerned that kids that are struggling with internalized homophobia are dealing with this distress by identifying as trans. And if they had, you know, any comments or thoughts about that, like, is there a role? I think my question was something like, is there a role as a therapist working with a young person to help them explore if some of their distress might be related to being gay or being lesbian? And if so, how does that work with this affirmation only model of gender affirming care, which I thought was an important question. I still think it's a really important question. And instead of getting any answer at all, it was like, oh, those are just right-wing talking points. And something like, you have no idea how much these kids have to go through to prove that they are trans. They are being pushed back on in every other area of life. And if they go to their therapist and their therapist is now pushing back on them as well, you're just going to drive them to suicide. So that this was their answer, which I just don't think is true at all. Like, I don't see evidence for that at all. Like, I don't think, maybe there's some, maybe now in 2025, we're starting to see some of this pushback, but back in 2021, 2022, this is not the case. Like, all of the schools, there's no school at all that's going to be pushing back on a child identifying as trans. There's no way. It's going to be affirmation only. It is now, it's a social contagion. There's social cred for being a trans kid. So even among like the students at school, like these, you know, Gen Alpha, Gen Z kids at school, there's no way that their friends are going to be pushing back on that. In fact, you see the opposite. You see entire friends groups that are transitioning at the same time. There's social pressure to transition. And then parents are told, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? And so there's this terrifying of parents. So I really don't see anywhere where these kids are getting any genuine pushback, like let alone exploration of like what else might be happening in their lives that are leading them to feel like transition is their only option. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. But that one experience in that grad school where like I was just being told, no, those are right-wing talking points. They had they had, they didn't have any response at all. And then it became like heavily directed at me to the point where I had, this was a Zoom class, because again, COVID days. And I had, there were a couple of other students in the class that private messaged me and asking me if I was okay. And it's like, I'm fine about this. But it got, and like the professor didn't do or say anything. Now, he didn't jump in and like join in on the trans affirmation at all. But he didn't jump in and defend me or say, hey, like, these are legitimate discussion points. We can leave the ad hominem attacks at home or anything like that. He didn't do that.
My program has been almost identical to that. It's considered the great human rights movement of our time is how it's framed. And anybody who would be against that, you would have supported the Nazis. You would have been on the side of the Jim Crow South. Whatever civil rights issue you can think of, ending slavery, you would have sided with the Confederacy. No matter what it is, like you would have been on the wrong side of history. This is our enlightened vision of what the true and good thing to do is. And the suicide piece is like the ultimate trump card that they use, even though that one's been debunked by the research.
For a while, yeah.
Yeah, and more recently, we've had the leaked WPATH files, the CAS report coming out of the UK. It turns out we are butchering mentally ill kids, many of whom, like you said, turn out to be gay. And it doesn't matter. It's full speed ahead. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what science says. It doesn't matter what's actually morally right. Like, this is social justice, therefore we're going to do it. I was in this one class, and professor was talking about how horrible Texas is because we limit gender-affirming care for minors. And a female student in the class raised her hand. She goes, well, what if a child later changes their mind about transitioning? And the professor goes, I never thought about that. And it's like, you're right. You're correct. You're on the right side of history, but you don't even know what the issue is. And it's just mind-blowing to me.
No, that's exactly right. And this is what was so frustrating about the whole grad school experience is that it became very clear to me that the students and probably the professors are simply not aware of any of the counter arguments that are out there for any of these issues, for any of the racial issues, like the gender one in particular. That's very true. And the only explanation that they can think of is that it's transphobia. It's that you hate trans people and you want them to die. And it's like, I don't know a single person who is concerned about the trans issue who wants trans people to die or wants them to disappear or wants to take away like the rights of like adults. Like, this is not what's happening.
And it's kind of interesting the way they frame that, because they're mixing up two things. Like, if someone actually kills a transgender person, that's like a homicide. And they're conflating that with, a trans person's true self is the opposite sex. And if you prevent them from transitioning, you're killing their real self. Right. And so they conflate those two like forms of murder in a sense. And so they can call you, you're a murderer, you want to kill them. It's so disingenuous.
Right. Yes. It's like, no, these are not the same things.
Yeah.
These are not the same things. But what's happening though is, there are serious human rights issues at stake, and this is what's so crazy to me. It's like they're looking, people are looking, they're searching for the human rights issue that they can be on the right side of history about, right? Like, they want to be these heroes. And this is a genuine human rights issue, like where we're taking away the future fertility of children that just don't have the framework for understanding at all what, the long-term consequences of these decisions. They're not even like the whole informed consent model is a complete failure in this area. And they're missing it. Like, they're missing it. There's the people like, here's your cause. Here's your cause, your genuine human rights cause of, the modern era. And you're on the wrong side. They're so desperate to be on the right side of history. That's the one situation that genuinely is like a human rights issue. They're on the wrong side of it. There's some serious irony there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. I wanted to get back to something you said a second ago about how the students, not the professors, are the ones who police a lot of this social justice ideology. And I found that is true as well. To me, it feels like on the first day of class, the professor kind of sets the tone. We're going to say our pronouns. We're going to do a privilege walk. We're going to talk about how we're here for social justice and diversity. They kind of set the tone. And then the rest of the semester, they kind of step back a little bit and let the students police it. And it's such a massive form of selection bias. If you were to look at who the students are in these programs and then look at who the most vocal students are, I know in the intake process, there's a little bit of like, how have you contributed to social justice lately? There's these various different kind of filters to where the people who you get who are like talking the most in class, like it's the most unrepresentative sample of Americans ever. You know what I mean? I'm wondering what you see there.
Yeah, I think for sure in the counseling field there's a selection bias. I'm sure there is. Like, I think there's a selection bias in people that are attracted to the field in general. It tends to be female dominated. People that have a lot of empathy and concern for others, and so, you're already going to get people that are perhaps overrepresented, oriented towards social justice issues. Then that's magnified by the application process where you need to talk about here's how I'm going to contribute to diversity. But then, like, even more so, I think it doesn't take a very large percentage. Probably, I don't even know, maybe 10 to 15% of the students are very vocal, but they're completely shameless. I don't know if shameless is the right word. I think they're just completely clueless that there's people that legitimately have different opinions. I think they just don't know. But they're very outspoken. They're very quick to comment. They're very quick to criticize. And then everybody else just shuts up. And either they're like me and they are like arguing in their heads. I think maybe there's a few that are like that. But I think a lot of other people are just like, well, I guess I'm wrong on this, right? I guess I'm just wrong. I guess I was wrong because, these people are very passionate. They know all this stuff. Maybe I'm not that familiar with these issues anyway. You're not doing a lot of extra reading on gender, like, which I was, but most other students are not. And like, maybe this is the first time they've really been hearing about these issues. And so be like, well, I guess I'm wrong. And that's absolutely what Daryl Bing Sue is telling you is like, if you're feeling any pushback against this material, it's because you've got internalized white supremacy, and so you're taught to really doubt your own instincts, and so yeah, it just doesn't take a very large percentage of people that are true believers to then sway the rest of the student body and to make people that would otherwise push back feel very uncomfortable and very reluctant to do so, which then gets, it then just makes it even more extreme where there's this, the perception is that everybody believes these things, but probably that's not exactly true.
Yeah, it creates such an ideological echo chamber, just a little bubble. And, the way you draw the boundaries, it's where anything other than 100% enthusiastic support for transitioning children makes you a Nazi. Like, when the boundaries are drawn that way, like, you're going to get for very limited discussion. You're not going to get for open exchange of thought. And, I would say on campus in classroom, it's extremely narrow. But there's been times off campus I'll be getting coffee with someone, and in a hushed voice, this one guy said, "Look, I got 3 kids. I'm not okay with transitioning kids." But you would never say that in the classroom. Like you would, I mean, that would essentially make you part of the Third Reich. That's how narrow the ideological boundaries are.
Yeah, right. And that's done on purpose, right? Like that's the framing that they've done on purpose. It, in my opinion, to shut down any real debate, any pushback, and it's like this idea that like you can't platform any other opinions because you're platforming Nazis and people who are full of hate, and again, like as if that's the only explanation for why a person would push back. So
Yeah. So I have noticed one population group that I do believe we lack multicultural competencies on, and is not being viewed without prejudice, and that is conservatives, Republicans, Trump supporters. I had one class where a professor, we broke us out into small groups, and the question we were supposed to discuss was, how are you going to be a social justice warrior for counseling? That was literally the question. And a woman in my small group said, I'm going to vote like my clients would want me to vote. And I said, how do you know how your clients are going to want you to vote? And there's like a look of shock on her face, and she goes, what if I get a Trump supporter as a client? Like, we're taught to respect every possible identity, but the more than 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump are viewed as like icky. There's like a visceral disgust response. Like these people are morally depraved. I'm wondering what, you've picked up on in that regard.
absolutely, and this was said multiple times. Especially because I was in school during that contested Biden-Trump election. But yeah, when we're asked to talk about what are some populations that you might feel uncomfortable counseling, and 100% like Trump supporters. And here I am in the class, like a person that voted for Trump. Believe me, I am never gonna say this ever. I'm like, and it was, I really wanted to though. I think people genuinely liked me in my classes. I think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I was wrong, but I think people did. And I'm like, what would they think if I just said, hey, guess what? I'm one of those demonized Trump voters. I wonder, would I have just been excommunicated? I don't even know what would have happened. But yeah, I mean, it's just this idea, like 50% of the population is just beyond the pale. And there's just not even any curiosity about like wouldn't you be curious? Like, I don't know. It's interesting to meet somebody who sees things really differently from you. But there's just no curiosity at all. And there's only one explanation, is that they're hate-filled and they are white supremacists and they're racists and they're transphobes and all that. So yeah, very discouraging. I had a classmate whose husband was a police officer. Again, this was also during the Black Lives Matter, and there were a few people there, a handful of people in my program that we kind of figured out who each other were over the course of the years that we were there. And we had private conversations about what it was like to just have to sit there and take this real abuse that was, hurled at, this was her husband, right? So this really nasty comments made about police officers, and here she is, a person that is putting his life on the line to protect and serve, and there's such a lack of just human decency in the way that they would talk about police officers. Anyway, yeah, that was something that she couldn't talk about. No other category of person can you hurl abuse at without even any awareness that you're doing it. But yeah.
it's bizarre how these issues are addressed in my program. I remember there's this one professor who said, you should never bring politics into the therapy office, but it's okay to do something like show support for Black Lives Matter. I was like, and there was another professor who said, when you're decorating your office as a therapist, you should only use inclusive things and not alienating things. And his example of something inclusive was a pride flag, and his example of something alienating was a Bible. And it's like, you have a very specific idea of what, what that looks like. It's talking to people like this, it's impossible to explain why there's anything wrong with their reasoning, because this is like, it's like on a sacred level, the way they conceptualize this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the idea of repressive tolerance, right? Like, in order to really have tolerance, you have to repress those who had been intolerant in the past, right? This is like, in order for us to have, in order for us to solve the problem of past discrimination, we have to have future discrimination. I think that's literally a quote from Kendi, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no awareness of like the nonsensical nature of this, and how, like, I don't know. Did you ever read the Sneetches book by Dr. Seuss?
The Sneetches on the beaches?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Stars upon thars.
Stars upon ours.
And just this continual.
That's how my dad always told me not to get a tattoo, is because of the Sneetches on the beaches.
The Sneetches on the beaches. Yeah.
He's like, you're going to want to get it removed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's where we are. It's like, okay, well, now we've just turned the tables, and we're going to see how well that works.
Yeah. And it's almost like, this idea that we came up with 8 seconds ago, there's no way it could possibly be wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, it's I mean, it's hard. My work background is in addiction recovery, and you see people of all different types of politics, a lot of people who are independent, apolitical, and it seems like the common goal is help them get sober, help them live a good life, help them deal with mental illness, and like this whole obsession with politics just doesn't make sense from where my work background comes from. I don't know.
It doesn't make sense. It also is just not relevant to the struggles that people. So, like, going from the graduate program to now being in practice, where I'm working with kids and teenagers and families and couples, like, these political issues are just not relevant. And I work with people of, I live in an area where there's a fair amount of racial diversity, and probably I went through my caseload, and I think something like 35% of my caseload are not white people. So it's not like I'm not working with people from different diverse cultural backgrounds. I am. I love that, actually. It's really interesting. It's never been an issue. It's been interesting. It's been a genuinely, like, cool part of my practice. I get to learn about different people, but, like, politics is not relevant in their lives. That's not what they're struggling with. So it's all of this emphasis in grad school, and it's at the lack, it's at the cost of actually learning the really important therapeutic skills that are out there to be learned. It's such a massive distraction. And then it turns out that it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
So.
I've got 2 questions left for you. And the first one is, how do we fix the way we train therapists?
Get rid of K-CREP.
Okay, go on.
So, yeah, I mean, this has been, as I've been interested in why things are as bad as they are in the graduate programs, because, like, you and I went to different schools. This is across the board in all the counseling schools, and it's coming from the top down, from K-CREP, the counseling for, accreditation of, I can't remember what the rest of it stands for. But all of this stuff is encoded. So Daryl Wing Su, the author of the infamous book, back in the early 1990s, he and some co-authors wrote a paper advocating for 31 multicultural counseling competencies, which was then adopted wholesale by KCREP, and it institutionalized all of the stuff that's in the textbook. Now it encoded that in what counseling education programs must teach their students in order for them to have accreditation. And accreditation is important for all kinds of things. If you want to be a therapist in many states, you have to graduate from a KCREP accredited school. In order for you to get your internship, a lot of places won't even take you if you're not, a student at a KCREP accredited graduate program. And this stuff is encoded from the top down, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Like, it started in, this first multicultural competencies in the 1990s, and then it ramped up again in 2000 and 2009 and 2015, and then the most recent KCREP accreditation standards are it's even worse. It's getting worse and worse every year. So I don't know. Like, with KCREP is fully corrupt. It's fully corrupt, and it's corrupt from the top down. If you look at the chairman, the chairperson, I can't say chairman, the chair, I guess it's just the chair these days, and the co-chair, they're coming from their professional background is in DEI advocacy, and so they're fully invested in this. And I think that the only way is for states like Texas, and like it was really disturbing to me. Florida, as of this coming July in 2025, they're going to require all of their counselors, in order to be licensed in the state of Florida, they all have to graduate from a KCREP accredited program in the state of Florida. I just think that there is not awareness. They just don't know. They think that, accreditation is good. It means that you're going to be teaching students how to be good counselors. That's not what this is about. It's political indoctrination. So Texas, I think this is going to have to come from the states, because it's the states that kind of set the standards in counseling. Licensure is by state. So the states can really do something. It's going to have to come from legislatures, I guess. So maybe there is a place for advocacy here, but not in the way that we're being taught in graduate school, right? But yeah, the states are going to need to, divest from, that's not the right word, but push back on the need for KCREP accreditation. I think it would be really great if there is an alternate accrediting body that can be like, we're going back to basics. We're going to take politics out of the classroom. We're going to really focus in on really good counselor training for how to be a good counselor in the therapy room with that person face to face. We're not going to be distracted by politics and all of this stuff. I don't know how to make that happen, because I'm really busy working with people, doing what I love, and I don't actually want to be a politician or do any of this, administrative stuff. That's not what I got into the field for. But that's kind of the only kind of way out of this mess that I see, is just getting out from under KCREP. The American Counseling Association, unfortunately, is just as bad. They're just as bad. So it's these top-down organizations that have been infiltrated, and this has been kind of the goal, trying the leftist march through the institutions, and they've been really successful at getting people embedded in these larger institutions that then have this heavy influence on everything underneath them. So it's very discouraging, but that's, I think, where the emphasis needs to be.
I think you're absolutely spot on about KCREP, the American Counseling Association, all of them. It is like the long march through the institutions, but it feels like they're done marching and they just sat down on their throne and they're ruling now. Like they've won. It feels like that's a perfect summary of what we're talking about, and why it is, because it's not just like one random professor here and there just happens to care about social justice. This is very top down, like you were saying. Yeah. So my final question is, and this is in terms of society more broadly, what is one thing that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
Oh, well, as a society, something I've been thinking a lot about is this idea of complex systems. And that I think is a really fundamentally really important. So the idea of complex systems is different from a complicated system. A complicated system is, a 747 that is made up a bunch of component parts, and you can take it apart, you can fully understand it, you can put it back together, you can figure out like if this part goes wrong, you can track it and figure out exactly how the whole system will fall apart. In a complex system is more like weather or climate or human biology, where small changes can have absolutely unpredictable results. I think about the trans issue as very much like this idea that that the human body is just a collection of parts, and you can just adjust hormones here and there, and now suddenly, you've turned a male into a female. It's not how human beings are. This is not how human societies are. And so I think that like this whole idea of anti-racism, the trans issue, like I think that we mess with systems at our peril, and we think that we can just plug in a little anti-racism here and we can fix all of society. We can't do that. Are you familiar with Thomas Sowell? You probably are.
Oh, love him. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually who I voted for president.
Oh man, I love that. Oh yeah, I wish. So he has this great concept of like the constrained and the unconstrained vision. I think this is from his book, A Conflict of Visions.
Yeah.
And the unconstrained vision, which is very much the leftist perspective, is that human beings are blank slates. We can program all of societies, and it's this idea that it's just like we just need to get the right experts in here, and we just need to tinker with society, and then we can like somehow magically have we'll be in magical, wonderful land where there is no hatred and human beings will live in bliss, and that's just. And then the constrained vision, which is that human beings have a human nature, that there's going to be unintended consequences 100%. There are trade-offs to every single thing that you do. Yes, you can make improvements, but there will be trade-offs. There will be unintended consequences. And like this is kind of just the tragic constrained vision of humanity, and it certainly is what has proven to be the case over and over and over again over the course of history. Anyway, I think a lot of the things that we are dealing with as a culture, a lot of the culture war issues, I think can be understood through this lens of: are we messing with a complex system, mistaking it for a complicated system? And if we do, which I think we are, and I think all of this is like technology has made us think that we live in a complicated system, but we don't. We live in a complex system. Anyway, these are kind of some of the ideas that I've been thinking about, and I just don't hear it talked about that much.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. From a faith perspective, it's the refusal to admit that we live in a fallen world and that we're no longer in the Garden of Eden. Having to kind of accept that. You can kind of come from like Sewell's like philosophical perspective, but it's kind of the same thing, really. And I think the denial that the natural state of life is not utopia. Just like coming to accept that is kind of the foundation of forming civilization, essentially.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for that. Loved our conversation. I would love to do this again sometime.
Yeah, me too.
If you'll stick around for just a second until the upload finishes, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much.